Hello, my name is Martin Zicari, and I will try in the next 10 minutes to introduce one of the main topics of my research, which is the role of digital activism when facing violence in Latin America. Specifically, I focus on the enforced disappearances of the 43 students of Ayotzinapa in the Mexican state of Guerrero. So let's get down to it. I look into digital activism around the Ayotzinapa case by analyzing a big data set from Twitter. My research is built upon a database of 2.5 million tweets, which starts the date of the disappearance of the students and follows the conversation for 4 years. I argue that Twitter big data analysis shows the way in which users of online platforms cope with the heightened sensorium of constant and long-standing violence through affective memory. This is, instead of characterizing Twitter as a platform of the hyper-present, I want to show how in this case, at least, the movement was towards the past. To keep this presentation interesting, I will reduce to a maximum the theoretical discussion and mainly show you my case study. So to sum up, I could say that my research interests starts from the theorization of activism as memory, which for Latin American scholars, it's central and well known, and in the Anglo-European academic has gained attention in the last 5 years or so. In my conception of activism as memory, I consider both the online and the offline spheres of collective action as equally constitutive of social movements and memory construction. The debates around online activism have been focusing on whether online platforms implicate an advantage or a disadvantage for civil society politics, and focus mainly on assessing the political impact of online practices. Both the civil optimist and civil skeptics approaches to online activism are not super relevant in my argument here. I am not concerned about the political efficacy of online activism, but rather in how these online communities have the potential of proposing a new emancipatory sensorium, a new way of dealing and coping with the pervasive violent context in which they are inscribed. So regarding my case study, due to the size of the database, it was virtually impossible to read all the tweets that compose the corpus. So alongside a computer scientist, I have conducted several quantitative and qualitative analyses that you can see in the list to get to know what was the conversation about on social media. I will only introduce the topic analysis, which is a collection of words with some degree of similarity. I will explain this further. For example, in this image, you can see how how a topic analysis list looks like. These are the 5 first topics of the first week after the Ayotzinapa crisis. To show more clearly how the topics are created, this chart shows how the computer transforms each tweet of these 2.5 million tweets. So it transforms each tweet of the corpus into a reduced version of it. After this, the computer will combine all the processed tweets and cluster similar topics together, looking at similar words and occurrences. Although topics look to be a sequence of words, the word sequence is only indicative of underlying conversation topics and the probability of finding those words together in a tweet. One of the things that we realized was that one of the most viral topics that emerged in the conversation was the Tlatelolco massacre of 1968. It was not a surprise, as in the rest of the media ecology, the connection between Ayotzinapa and Tlatelolco was being made by activists, academics, journalists, and cultural producers. I will show some of the ways in which such connection has played out on our Twitter database. The 1968 Tlatelolco massacre is one of the most fundamental and violent events in Mexico history, in which the military repressed a student protest in the verge of the International Olympics, killing in between 300 and 1,200 students, depending on the source. I argue that the emancipatory breakthrough of the connection between Ayotzinapa and Tlatelolco is the configuration of a strong contestatory narrative that moves away from the ongoing crisis vocabulary of Mexican violence, which is mainly explained by cartels, by cartel and drug violence, directing the attention to the Mexican state. Big data shows that Twitter conversation was slowly deconstructing the supposed novelty and exceptionality of the Ayotzinapa crisis throughout resorting to the recent past, retracing the roots back to the unsolved yet alive fantasies of 1968. The online response to Ayotzinapa is not like the last one and will definitely configure a new next in the activist panorama. In quantitative terms, the presence of Tlatelolco in our database can be spotted since the beginning. The topic analysis of the first week of the Twitter conversation already shields Tlatelolco as one of the first 25 topics, as you can see in the bottom, highlighted in red. It's interesting to note that the connection is already made through a memorializing discourse with the viral phrase, October the 2nd, we don't forget. That is, 2 de octubre no se olvida, in topic 25. Taking a look at the second week topic analysis, it is clear that the Tlatelolco-Ayotzinapa connection is becoming more and more specific in the online conversation. Of the 25 most relevant topics, Tlatelolco appears referenced in number 1, in line with other massacres of the recent past, Tlatlaya, Acteal, and Atenco. 2 de octubre no se olvida, from the first week in topic number 25, is now rephrased into We don't forget Ayotzinapa, in topic 16. The sequence gets more and more specific and interesting as weeks pass by, but I will let it here for time reasons, and maybe we can discuss it later. Up to now, I wanted to stress the quantitative importance of the Tlatelolco-Ayotzinapa connection as it has developed in the online conversation in Twitter. The conversation evolves using the discourse of memory and forgetfulness, we don't forget, to talk about Mexico's recent past and previous massacres that shaped activism against violence since 1968. The first approach to big data shows how an alternative and emancipatory narrative can take shape amid micro and isolated activist practices, often regarded as superfluous and disengaged, like tweeting. The multiple currents and trajectories, rather than a unified mass movement, can model a breakthrough in the way people cope with pervasive violence in Mexico. I want also to introduce a more concrete example of this operation. The fifth most viral link of the subset also serves as a good example of the online rerouting of the affective intensities of facing violence. The link directs to a Facebook photo album of Colectivo Los Ingrávidos, a photo collective, and shows a series of images taken at the 2015 March for Ayotzinapa. The images, as you can see them in the presentation, are set to create a pathway to 1968 through a remediation of its immanent traces. The use of black and white is accompanied by the resurfacing of flags, mottos, and kinesthetics in a sort of mise-en-scène in which an airy and ghostly images render 2015 as an atemporal epoch, which can be also 1968, 2014, or any other time. The flag from the Consejo Nacional de Huelga 1968, the National Strike Council flag, is almost the only visual anchorage in the series of images. The rest of them relate to the classical kinesthetic of protest, like throwing a Molotov bomb, running from the police, or being pepper gas, which are nevertheless veiled in a vague, dreamlike atmosphere. The only text in the tweets that leaks to the picture reads, October the 2nd from Tlatelolco to Ayotzinapa. Behind the smoke and the blurriness of the images, we can see the bodies of protesters as they face repression, from advancing police, fronts, smokes, etc. Images which become the outstanding narrative of the Mexican recent past for the album. From the Tlatelolco massacre to the Ayotzinapa case, it seemed as if the kinesthetic is put on hold, suspending in a stretched out time of protest and transformed into a viral photo album. Colectivo Los Ingrávidos is disturbing the temporality of protest through a historically blended imaginary that circulates virally online, rerouting the anxiety away from the always actualized need of responding to the last political trend and into the country's historical memory. The online choreographies of memory, anchored in the decentralized and multidirectional platform of Twitter, remediated the core sensory of 1968 memory into a new narrative that subverts the teleology of Mexican democracy. Big data analysis of Twitter shows an online community that, through highly coded microactions like tweets, retweets, mention, and hashtags, discuss various topics and appeal to a particular vocabulary that connect 1968 with Ayotzinapa through the narrative arc of the failure of the state and denunciation of repression, invalidating the supposed advancements in the sphere of the political. Well, that was all on my short presentation. I hope you enjoyed and it sparked some ideas, and I hope we can discuss further in the Q&A. Thank you.